Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stellar Open Protocol discussion for June 17th, 2021. So this meeting, like all these meetings, it's a part of the process for making changes to the Stellar Protocol, and we live stream these meetings so that anyone interested can follow along. In these meetings, we go over CAPs, or Core Advancement Proposals. These are open source specs that describe new features that are designed to evolve the protocol to meet ecosystem needs. And before we start, I do want to point out that this is a technical discussion, a very technical discussion. So you may want to review the CAPs we're about to go over and the recent developer mailing list threads about them, both of which are linked to in the event description. Before we dive in, I also want to give a quick process overview. So to allow for discussion and feedback collection and vetting, each CAP goes through a specific life cycle, right? It's proposed, it's drafted, and then it's discussed on the Stellar Dev mailing list. Again, there's a link to that mailing list in the event description, so if you're interested, you should join it. Based on the feedback that comes in, a draft is then revised and reevaluated. And when that process is complete, it's put to the CAP committee who decides whether or not to accept it. Now, after a CAP committee vote, the CAP enters into a 1-week final comment period, which gives everyone a last chance to raise questions, also on the Stellar Dev mailing list. And if the CAP makes it through that final comment period, it's implemented in a major Stellar core release. Then there's still one final step before it hits the network. Validators vote on whether or not to upgrade the network to a new version of the protocol, thereby accepting or rejecting the change. So ultimately, at the end of the process, the network decides on major protocol changes. Now, at the moment, there are two similar proposals on the table, CAP 37 and CAP 38. Both proposals aim to improve overall network liquidity by introducing automated market makers at the protocol level. So there's general agreement that AMMs, which allow for the creation of liquidity pools, are a simple way to attract capital and enable high volumes of trading, and that introducing them to the protocol would have great benefits for the network, right? It leads to better liquidity, which means better exchange, which means better cross-currency payments. But while the proposals have the same fundamental goal, and actually a lot in common besides that, there are a few implementation differences between them. The big one, it has to do with order routing, right? CAP 37, it suggests interleaving AMMs with the built-in order books that make up Stellar's decentralized exchange, also known as the DEX. So in CAP 37, a buy or sell order can execute in part against an AMM and in part against the DEX. It basically pulls from each to piece together the best overall rate. So that's interleaved order routing. CAP 38, on the other hand, takes a best venue approach, right? An order fully executes against one or the other, either fully against an AMM or fully against the DEX, whichever one provides the best overall rate. So that's best venue routing. There's already been a lot of discussion about both approaches, and it's mostly happened on the Stellar Dev mailing list. Today, we've arrived at a point where we kind of need to start figuring out our path forward. So CAP 38 has had more revisions of late than CAP 37, so it's a little bit further along, but let's imagine that CAP 37 was brought to parity, so it dealt with the issues that CAP 38 deals with, things like authorization. Which approach would we choose and why? That's where we're starting today. And I'm going to open it up for discussion. And also, if I got any of that wrong, please say so, because I want to make sure that we're representing this correctly. So who wants to start?
Maybe I can start, given that I was the last to talk, I think, on that mailing, on the dev mailing list, so that people can take it from there. So I think, yeah, like we had like a good exchange, I think, with Marcus on the dev mailing list. So like I think we reached a point, I think, in that thread where we are basically thinking about, yeah, CAP 37 as something that can be done on top of CAP 38. And I think as a framework, I think where we ended up is really thinking about it as, okay, like there are like some potential concerns there. But like, are those concerns strong enough that they would be basically deal breakers for not doing like just CAP 38? So like the main concern I had in that thread was, and actually like as we've been moving along CAP 38, this became true. The CAP 38 at this point is the longest CAP we ever wrote. It's actually quite complicated. It has many things in there, like And I didn't actually anticipate that we had so much complexity, like upfront. I thought the hard stuff was going to be around the arithmetic, like the fixed point math, that we had experience with before with the DEX. And this turned out to be bad too, but yeah, basically many other things going on there. Yeah, so where we are right now at with this thread is it looks like there are no like deal breakers, right? Like the things, for example, interleaving. Okay, interleaving is better. Like I think nobody disagrees with that. But can we not having interleaving, so doing best venue, is that something that maybe, even though it's not optimal, is that good enough to get us get this AMM solution out the door quicker? I think there was like a potentially other thing that was this one we didn't even talk about it, because this one is really like a very different, like a big departure basically from how even existing AMMs in other like in other systems like Uniswap, for example, like the dynamic fee topic that is in cap37. This is another kind of worms in a way, like in terms of complexity, that I don't think is necessary, to get a first version out. Both are interesting, but I think where we are right now is, it looks like those are should be considered at a later point, given that they're not strictly necessary for a first version. I keep repeating myself. I'm sorry.
So I mean, I feel like part of what you're saying is cap38, which is already fairly complex, is simpler than cap37. That some of the things, the features essentially that cap37 suggests, could be added later. Is that correct?
That was always the approach we are trying to do, cap38 being the minimal set of things we could do to get AMMs out. And then the tension is always, is that something that's actually shippable, or are we going to run into something that makes it basically non-viable? Like, so for example, I think one of the concerns around, are we going to cause the network to grind to a halt, let's say, because we have so much arbitrage, or like the markets become so inefficient that that things are just unusable. Like those, I think, were raised on the mailing list. And I think at this point it's just like we don't know.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, Jed, maybe you can.
Yeah, I would say, like, I haven't heard a disagreement for cap38 being on the path to cap37, as in, like, we would basically have to implement cap38 before we implement cap37 anyway. And so really the question is just like, does it make sense to go all the way to 37, or can we release 38 in the meantime? And really the only arguments I've seen for releasing, for going all the way to 37 are that the arbitrage thing that Nicola just mentioned, and then also the fact that you essentially need a new UI to interact with cap37, where you kind of don't to interact with cap38. Or sorry, you need a new UI to interact with cap38, but not really a new UI to interact with cap37, because basically cap38 really only supports path payments to take these liquidity offers, and that path payments aren't really well supported in the ecosystem, I don't think. I mean, definitely not like StellarX and things like that. So but yeah, so just basically, so really the question here is the danger of arbitrage and the kind of the burden of having people like change their UIs, is that great enough to warrant core going all the way to cap37? And like I said on the mailing list, I think the arbitrage thing is better addressed in a different way, because we're gonna have arbitrage even in cap37 world. I think the UI thing is unfortunate, but it just seems way better to get this out earlier, and then we can proceed to work on some like more cohesive UI like later, basically, if it seems worth it. So yeah, but I don't know if anyone disagrees. Like, does anyone actually disagree here? So.
I mean, I guess the question that I have is, so I understand that a UI, that's something that could be solved later. And I guess my question is about arbitrage. It seems like the risk with going with cap 38 is that it would open up new possibilities for arbitrage. And your argument that you made on the mailing list, Jed, is that it's better to deal with that as a separate issue. But I guess what the question is there a way to actually understand the risk that arbitrage poses? Is it a real risk, right? Is there a risk that implementing cap 38 would create so many arbitrage opportunities that would have an effect on the network? Or do we feel like that's not actually something to worry about in the short term with cap 38? And basically why?
So I can take that, Jed, if you want. Or like I think there are like two types of problems, right? That comes with arbitrage. One is like actually having this being an inefficient market, but arbitrage is correcting that. So in a way, maybe it doesn't matter. Like it just makes it creates those weird like change in price on certain pairs. But at the end of the day, like those AMMs end up being balanced correctly. So it's not that. I think that's not so much of a problem. Maybe there's like like you have a larger spread in a way, like for like a little bit, like things like that. I think one of the main concerns I think came from more like the amount of traffic that potentially gets generated by this by more arbitrage activity. So for example, more recently, we had like a lot of volatility, for example, on the market, like in crypto in general, like what was it, like maybe a month ago, something like that, where it was like crazy. And when this was happening, we had actually a lot of ledgers on the network that were with a lot of failed transactions. And I think that could be the type of things that happens more often if we have like this discrepancy between the DEX and AMMs. The reality is that with the work that we did in the last year, this type of, so the impact on the network is actually kind of not that bad. I mean, it doesn't, like the same question a year ago would have been, okay, if we have like this type of arbitrage spikes and whatnot, we were actually seeing like certain ledgers being impacted. Like sometimes we had like delays of like 10 seconds, 15 seconds on ledgers. Like this was not acceptable. So we found ways to fix that. But we had a good stress test, I guess. So yeah, like last month, and like for like a good what was it, like a good month, I think, like in April basically. And yeah, the network was fine. Like, the annoying thing is that we have downstream systems have all those trade transactions, and that I think we have to be mindful of that. I think that's kind of the thing for me that is where this is potentially annoying. But that's something that we can improve over time. I think it's like, for example, Horizon right now, there's quite a bit of overhead even for failed transactions. I think we can probably do quite a bit better. And we have also similar ideas in core. I think we have to deal with that regardless, because we have like some historical data already with a bunch of failed transactions. And I think when people want to rebuild historical data, I mean, like the meta, for example, based on those old ledgers, I think we want to do that efficiently. So I think we'll find ways to make this better overall.
Yeah, to me, it seems like like if arbitrage goes up a lot, yeah, it'll certainly be a nuisance, but it doesn't seem like there's a way for it to really be catastrophic. I mean, there's lots of guardrails and checks in the network already that would prevent it from doing that. But yeah, like things like catching up to the network or running Horizon could potentially be like more load than we would want. So I think we should deal with arbitrage. I'm not convinced it'll like I said, the mailing list, I'm not convinced like going to 38 will greatly increase arbitrage unless it just greatly increases the number of people using the network, right? Which is we want, right? So, but it doesn't seem like something that we have to fix before we release 38. Is my point. Like I think we can release it, and if arbitrage goes up, then we'll certainly address it. We need to address arbitrage regardless, so we should be working on that kind of in parallel. It's kind of my thought. So.
I mean, just kind of for the record, I know this isn't on the table. So my preference in all this, I think the real priority is to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good in this project. And so what I would, my ideal solution for an AMM would be, as fast to implement and deploy as possible, and as easy to kind of upgrade or back out, when we decide we want to do something better. And so from my point of view, both CAP 37 and CAP 38 are a little bit too linked with the order book. I mean, I've talked to some of you privately. My ideal world, it would just be like completely separate set of operations and order book. It would be even a separate phase of like transaction processing. So I'm not seriously putting this on the table, except to point out the fact that there's two ways to reduce arbitrage. One is to make the arbitrage expensive because there's a fee, and the other is to make it not risk-free, right? So if you did have a separate kind of transaction to take advantage of the MM and you couldn't take advantage of the order book in the same transaction, then there would at least be some risk that like you would buy something and not be able to offload it the way you thought you were going to be able to offload it. So while I think that sort of where we're headed is something that's like a bit more integrated with like that works with legacy transactions, if we really are concerned about arbitrage, we should also consider the ability just to make it not risk-free, to kind of not allow the same things to happen in the same transaction.
I think that can people see me, hear me? Okay.
Yeah, there was just a weird like silence.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Kind of like for me, the extension of what David's saying, and I'm one of the people who was talking that he said that he was talking to about what he was saying, but like there are all these kinds of trade-offs that we're making today. What's the simplest thing that we can implement that people will readily adopt? Is kind of the way that I've been looking at it. And so going like one step simpler, as David was saying, and introducing new operations that completely decouple it from the
transactions even that happen at a different phase, for example.
Yeah, that would be even one step further. This would be a real, I think, an even bigger hindrance to adoption, even than what Jed was pointing about, how path payments aren't widely adopted in the ecosystem. But I think the kind of bigger picture on doing anything like that is, no matter when we were to, like, imagine we were to do what David was proposing or anything else considerably drastic like that, that would be such a disruptive change that, like, what would be the difference if we were to make a really disruptive change like that now, or if we were to deploy something that we're ready to deploy now and make a really disruptive change like that in 6 months or in a year or whatever? Having something working in the short run wouldn't really change my calculus, at least, on making further changes like that, we'll have this new data, we'll have all this new information about what's good, what's not good. And then we can build a system that's potentially better in various ways, maybe ways that we don't even realize now. And there's not really anything stopping us from making those changes later.
Yeah, and just in case it wasn't clear, like I did end up being sort of persuaded by this argument. And again, I think the fact that CAP 37 is a potential retrofit onto CAP 38, again, speaks to the ability of CAP 38 to be like a reasonable first step that's not overly limiting what we're going to do in the future as well. So.
I mean, so it sounds like people are generally saying, okay, CAP 38 is a reasonable first step forward. It's simpler. We could add CAP 37 to it later. We could explore possibilities to sort of deal with arbitrage in various different ways, but it feels like a reasonable first step forward so that we can implement it and get moving, offer AMMs, start to gather information, and do it in like a sort of first step way that can lead to other things. And it feels like that's what everyone's saying. Start simple, implement something now, see what happens, know that we can retrofit things to it later. And I guess my question is, does anyone have a problem with that approach, or does that approach just generally make sense? Any questions, issues? Because I guess then I just wonder if we're at the point where it is time to start to basically move CAP 38 forward in the process. And what that would look like, again, just to like sort of remind people what the process is that right now CAP 38 is a draft. There is a CAP committee, all of whom are on this call, who could vote to approve that draft. And if it was approved, we'd move it into final comment period. People out there, anyone would still have an opportunity to comment on it for 1 week on the Stellar Dev mailing list. And depending on what happens in that week, we could move it into accepted and then start to work on an implementation with an eye towards including it in the next protocol release. I guess I feel like we're at the time when it may be time to sort of vote on whether or not to accept CAP 38. Does anyone object to the idea of doing that? Is there any blocker?
One question I had about CAP 38 is, if things do turn out to be bad, how do we decide in a principled way this is time to pull the plug or pause the AMM or something like that? I know we have a mechanism in the CAP to turn it off, but what would be the trigger for that?
I guess bad in what context here? Bad as in like we misjudged, the arbitrage or something like that, or bad in the context of like, oh, there's a bug because this is complicated.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like maybe there's a bug. That's like one extreme of bad. And then there's sort of this in-between bad where we have a lot of arbitrage and Horizon is struggling to read all these failed transactions, but it's sort of okay, but maybe we should turn it off because it would be better. There's a possibility of a gray area where we'd have to think about that. Do we want to think about that now, or do we want to think about it then?
And I think we have the tools for that. I think like talking about this gray thing is kind of funny because it's also the more it's unclear if it's bad, the harder it's going to get people to vote for the change, right? So yeah, I think it would have to be more on the extreme, like there's like this security issue or whatever, right? That basically nobody's going to disagree with voting for a change to fix it. Like fixing it short term, maybe turn it off, and then of course it would be like turn around and a new protocol release.
It's just to be clear, right? If this situation unfolds, like basically if validators agree to the protocol change that includes this CAP 38, and then later it turns out that something is wrong, then the step to sort of undo that or turn it off, that would be up to the network as well. The validators would also have to vote to accept whatever the solution is. That's correct, right?
Yeah, and that's why like it's the less it's it's a home run, that it's something good or bad, like the harder it's going to get to get actual adoption.
I think the only chance of pulling the plug, hitting the button, whatever you want to call it, getting that level of unanimity, as Nicola was saying, would be in the event that there was an obvious way that people were going to lose money. If we were in that kind of a situation, I think that it would not be hard to convince validators like, okay, let's not let that happen. I think short of that, personally, I have a hard time imagining that people would vote, to turn it off, and it'd be more likely that we'd be in a situation where we're under some pressure to make some improvement and release a new version of the protocol in a shorter time maybe than otherwise.
It's also worth mentioning that we got the communication channels established with the validators, and time and time again, the validators have proven themselves super responsive and responsible. So, if something bad does happen, I believe we can get the network together pretty fast to make a change.
So given all that, it seems like we're landing in a position where we say, okay, if something does go wrong, if it's something is clearly wrong, then we can work with the network, and we believe that the network is full of reasonable and responsive validators who can help sort of get things back on the rails. Not that we're anticipating that to happen, but just like we're really getting to like the worst case unhappy path scenario here.
Yeah, no, it's all about setting low expectations so that we're always happy of the outcome. No, but I think Eric's concern is actually the same than what people raise, right? With if you have a lot of arbitrage, maybe fees go up like more than they should. It's annoying. I mean, it's a nuisance. And in that case, I think we'd have to probably like figure out, in a more accelerated way, like mitigations for arbitrage. Yeah, I think that's kind of what this is
exactly. There's two concerns, right? One is fees going up, and the other one is that number of failed transactions spikes in a way that is very large and starts to cause us performance issues. And so from my perspective, the risk is the second one, and I want to get ahead of that. So I think my takeaway from this is I should accelerate plans to deal with that possibility now. But there is some risk that this will happen in real time, right? But we have a few months, and we're working on this already, as you say.
And the thing is that you were already processing today, like the steady state non-failed transactions is over 100 transactions per second. So, it's already substantial.
Yeah, I mean, as the baseline of successful transactions goes up, that increases everything for Horizon, as we discussed, Nico. But the number of failed transactions is potentially unbounded, right, in a ledger?
No, it's not. It's bounded by the whatever setting we have. Right now, it's 1,000 per ledger.
Yeah, they count as part of the ledger limit.
Yeah, so people would have to vote to increase that, which they could do today anyways.
Also, let's not forget that there's an optimistic scenario here, which is that there's a lot of arbitrage, but the AMM works really well. So the actual solution is we deprecate the order book, and we just kind of convince the ecosystem that it's better not to place offers in the order book.
An even happier path. Perhaps people don't need to be convinced because they like the AMM so much, and they
exactly.
Right. So one clear thing, right? We know that this proposal would create AMMs alongside the order books, but we don't know what that's going to do to the order books, right? We don't know yet.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
I think this is one of those like dynamic analysis type of things. It's very, very hard to predict. I mean, we're all considering this kind of like we're engineers, we build stuff, and so we like to consider bad cases and make sure that we're not going to end up in really bad cases as a consequence. But like one of the things that we're like, perhaps this does increase the amount of arbitrage. I suspect it will, at least a bit. I think it'd be hard to convince someone that wouldn't be a consequence of what we're doing. But like if it were to simultaneously reduce the amount of market making on the order book because people are just populating AMMs instead, it's hard to know which of those two effects will be bigger. Like it wouldn't be that weird to me. It wouldn't be weird to me at all, actually, if the total amount of traffic on the network actually went down as a consequence of this. Like averages lower, spikes are higher is like a totally plausible outcome.
Great. I mean, it feels like, Eric, did that sort of address your concerns? Do you have more questions?
That addresses my concern. I have one other question. Following the doomsday trend of all engineers, what happens if this is wildly successful and everybody wants to join Stellar and join the AMM and deposit pool shares and retrieve pool shares and everything else? Have we thought about that? I mean, works for Uniswap. Is that a good thing?
Fees go up. I mean, we've got a lot of room to run here, between us and let's say Ethereum. But but I think that would just be the outcomes. Fees go up, right?
Fees would go up, yeah. All right.
Right. Well, or the ledger limits could go up too, right? There's still headroom that validators have to increase the capacity of ledgers too.
Yeah.
And we'd all be really happy because this idea would have gained traction and everyone would love it.
I mean, if AMMs are super popular, I mean, they require way less transactions. I think most of the transactions on the network now are people adjusting their orders on the order book. So that kind of all goes away. So we have even more room if in an AMM world. So.
Any other questions, thoughts, doomsday scenarios that we want to play out? Are we ready for a vote? I feel like we're ready for a vote. And I kind of just want to do it now live on this call, but before I do that, I'll just get like real procedural and say, does anyone like object to actually doing a sort of live vote and want time to think about this? In which case we can conduct the vote asynchronously over email. Yeah, cool. Okay, so then I think we should have a vote here to move CAP 38 into final comment period pending acceptance. Again, at the end of, there'll be a week for people to sort of raise questions on the Stellar Dev mailing list, and we'll post this new status change there. And at the end of that week, well, we'll see what kind of comes in. Depending on what happens at the end of that week, we may move this into accepted. And so, based on, also, if anyone ever wants to check out this whole procedure, you can look in the GitHub CAP repository, and it lays out exactly the life cycle of a CAP. And you'll see that there are 3 voters, and it requires unanimous consent from all of them to move a CAP into accepted. And so it is Jed, David, and Nicola. So let's start with Jed. Jed, what's your vote?
Yes.
Yes to accept. Okay.
Yeah.
David, what's your vote?
Yeah, I'd like to accept CAP 38.
Great. Nicola, what's your vote?
No, surprise, I'm kind of yes.
Yes, okay, cool. So we have 3 yeses, and that means that CAP 38 moves into final comment period pending acceptance. I think that's it. Any other final comments, thoughts, questions that anyone has?
Well, does the group want to provide some direction on CAP 37? Like, should CAP 37 now be adjusted to be layered on top of CAP 38?
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
Please go ahead, Jed.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think I'm not saying that we would implement this stuff immediately. I think part of it is that we want to see how things play out. Like maybe everyone moves to AMM and we don't need to interleave these things and we can just skip that complexity, but likely people will continue to use both. So it would be good to have CAP 37 be there in case we want to go down that road. So that would be my take.
So technically that means, or procedurally that means CAP 37 stays in draft mode and may be revisited in order to like sort of graft it onto CAP 38 in the future. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think there are some changes to CAP 37 that would be worth making because not all of the concerns in the CAP make sense in light of how CAP 38 is actually implemented. So there's some things to clean up there as well.
Right, it would require revision.
Ideally, some things get easier because like the authorization logic or whatever can be just, can piggyback on CAP 38. And then some things need to be rethought. There's also feedback. There's a few things like, for example, I think to get closer to adoption, CAP 37 should not use floating point because we like try to avoid floating point because it's like the arithmetic's not associated, which is kind of annoying. Again, that easy fix, but just like basically I would encourage CAP 37, the revision to continue and to try to coexist, to try to have a deployment path or a theoretical one of how this would work now that we're trying to move ahead with CAP 38.
Great. Sounds like a plan. Anything else? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for participating. Thanks everyone who's watching. Again, we encourage you to participate as much as you want in any of these discussions about the future of the Stellar protocol. There are links to these particular caps in the event description, so you can go read them to actually see what it is that we're talking about. And there's also a link to the Stellar Dev mailing list, which is where we do things like notify people about the changes of status of caps. And it's also where all this discussion before this meeting happens about the caps. So again, it's open participation. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And we will now move cap 38 into final comment period pending approval. All right, and that's it. Thanks, everybody.